right, so the next film we're reviewing is Anna Katz's The Dog Who Wouldn't Be Quiet. And Jim, tell us about this film.
So I think I've partially ended up with telling everybody about this film because it is quite a hard film to describe, I think. So I saw this at Sundance at the start of the year, and it's a strange film in the sense that it covers a very long span of time, but it's also a very short film. It's probably the shortest film we've reviewed on the show for quite some time, maybe ever, as a feature film. It's only 73 minutes long. And basically we follow one guy, Sebastian, who is played by Anna Katz, the director's brother, Daniel Katz. And it starts off with this kind of inciting incident, which is where the film gets its title from. And he is asked by his neighbour what the deal is with his dog. It's crying all day. It's making noises. It's the dog who wouldn't be quiet. And from here, we then basically set off on... I said this in my written review of it. It does end up kind of a shaggy dog story. Just leaving from one point to another. It's quite funny in that way. But you start off with, because his neighbours can't cope with the dog wailing while he's away at work, he starts taking the dog to work. So the dog is then, he's basically told by his HR department, you go where the dog goes. So he goes. So he finds a new job, and then this is now sort of like caretaking on a farm, and then there's a tragic incident, and that's it. And basically it's all these different vignettes from his life. And basically what we've spoken about there are kind of the first three, and it's these basically just steps from one to the other, and until we get quite far down the line of this guy's life, we're basically, the way I viewed it as is it's kind of this, the drastic differences in direction you can end up with over time as a result of very small things, and the sources of those things are sometimes quite interesting. They're to do with how you make connections with people, how you're exploited in certain economic systems, perhaps, and things like that. And I find it an absolutely fascinating, very low-key film. Throughout it, there's this whole kind of absurdist, dark, maybe not particularly dark, but just kind of like absurdly deadpan comedy going on in the background. At one stage, there is some sort of pandemic afflicted. It seems to have unfortunately happened to a bunch of films that came out around about this time. I don't think this was part of the imagination it would come out during this sort of time. There's a pandemic, but basically it affects the air, but only above a certain ground, so the people need to crawl around on the ground to avoid breathing in this poisoned air. And there's all these sort of things going on, but then some of the commentary that the film weaves in around that is very satirical and funny, but also very pointed, and actually makes a lot of interesting points. I've kind of given the game away there, and I really like this film. It is one I am fascinated to see what other folk made of, though. So who wants to either join me or puncture my bubble?
I'll join you. I loved this film in lots of ways, and it's interesting that you mentioned low key, and we talked a lot about low key with First Cow. I think there are aspects of low key to this, but it's more my type of film, an absurdist kind of story. I liked that it was short. I think things like Boyhood, that you're journeying along the life of somebody and you're following them. And from what I read, they took quite a few years to film this, so it's being short, but that it's different parts of. I don't know if that has to do with production or whatnot, but that 4 different cinematographers were involved in this, and yet it seems like a very, very cohesive film. I do think that the bubble incident, if you will, or the meteorite disaster was quite amusing and also quite poignant at this stage, because it makes you think about how quick life goes, and they keep saying things like, oh, it'll go away in 6 months, and then in within a minute you're back to normal. And
Yeah, there's
so
one point where it says, like, I think the doctor says something like, God willing, in 1 year we'll be back to normal. And it's like, oof, that line hits hard.
I know, it's so there's so much to take from it right now, and it blends the line of, like, absurdism and pathos and humor all in something. So I'm quite interested to see Katz's other work, because I then read a little bit about her sort of being part of the what was the new Argentine cinema, sort of like second wave of that. And I'm looking forward to seeing more, because I was very, very intrigued and very excited to see this. It was a lovely film to watch.
I think I'm cooler on the film than you two. I like First Cow. It started off quite slow and contemplative, but unlike First Cow, it never drew me in to the narrative, into the film. I liked how it took time to reflect on its images, like a lonely sandwich on a bus seat, or someone slicing slowly into an aubergine. And there's a lot of beauty to be seen in it. But for me, it was strongest when it was focusing on that absurdism, on that central irony, those centrally ironic elements, like the sudden switch to a pandemic film, and the sort of the contrast at the start between everyone complaining about this dog and the dog seeming quite pleasant, actually. Like he seems like a quiet dog, and I really enjoyed that conflict and the kind of Kafka quality to that to how that was developing. But then it never seemed to develop on that for me, and it came across as just a bit disjointed and meandering. Beautiful, but meandering.
I really, really like this film. It kind of transports you back to when we were, I think it was a few podcasts ago now, when we were all diving into the works of Roy Anderson. And this film kind of reminded me a lot of his work. It's sort of like a really dark and apocalyptic version, for sure, but you had that blend of humour and kind of humanity in the same breath, and how awkward it all is. And sort of worked kind of like, reminded me a lot of Songs of the Second Floor, like a big visual poem about the whole, like, it starts off with kind of one focal point, one person, and it kind of blends into how everyone's living, and how these connections kind of manifest themselves, and how and in the same way how people end up becoming disconnected, and how things don't kind of flourish in the same way anymore. I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and I think there was a very, very much a great quietness to the film. You needed to, I think, if you weren't drawn in from the onset, it was very difficult to get back into the film. If you were only getting kind of drawn in near the middle, I don't think that you would have had the same experience. I think that it's one of those things that you had to like as the kind of as it opens, more so than anything else. And much like Anderson's work, I think, to really kind of appreciate the kind of vignettes and things and the situations that go through them. But I just think that, especially I think with it being black and white as well, was really a nice aesthetic to what the topic it was talking about. You had this whole kind of pandemic, and this really kind of guy that's really been having a tough time. He's not meshing well with his neighbours, he's having problems at work, and it's all just, but then when things couldn't get any worse, you can't stand up to walk around without a big bubble over your head. So I think that it transports through time very well. And I loved how you kind of have it goes to the highest of absurdities in quite a short amount of time, but nothing nothing kind of throws you off. It's almost like, oh, of course that's going to happen next. There's nothing really too unusual in this film, because everything's so different, but also almost so relatable. And I think that it does have that problem where it's came out at this time during a pandemic, and everyone's sort of going to relate everything to that. I think there was slightly more to it than just the pandemic. I think that, much like Anderson, it's sort of exploring the different corners of life that we don't often take the time to think about. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's one of those films that is really my cup of tea, though, to be fair.
I mean, and I have to say, if it does become a noted as a pandemic film, I like it a lot more than the first pandemic film we reviewed, which was Vivarium. So just to note that,
I think Vivarium was maybe just too soon.
Because
Because I saw it, I saw it in person at Glasgow Film Festival. It was right after. It was right after the first lockdown. It was way too soon to be about a couple who couldn't get out of their house.
This takes the pandemic a little bit lighter, and we will get through it.
It's so weird thinking about the pandemic in relation to like cinema just now, because with The Woman in the Window, I did have a quick browse to see what people were saying about it out of curiosity, and I actually saw, I don't know what review it was, but I saw someone linking it to COVID-19 and saying it's all about social distancing and her being unable to leave the house, and I was like, I feel like people are just reaching for the COVID analysis now.
I was about to say, this is where you put up that gif from Thor Ragnarok and just going, is it though? Is it? One thing I actually rather liked about this film, because it has a point to make about like some political stuff, and I think the absurdist elements work really well to do that. Because where it comes the most is the pandemic element of it, right? And how you avoid this illness is either by having like a giant bubble on your head or crawling around on the ground, and it's just reducing kind of like the inequalities that the characters in the film are experiencing through this like completely absurd signifier. It really does hammer home what a problem that is. And I think it's just an interesting way to make that sort of point to me. It's an interesting way to get that theme and kind of how people struggle against systems in an interesting way. And I think it really shows up how good satire is extremely effective by highlighting these things. And I think this film does it at a number of points pretty well, but I think that's where it stuck out to me the most. I'm just really impressed with the film. I thought it was really good, and I think it looks excellent as well. I think Steph's point about the aesthetics of the film is really, really something worth noting as well. I think it's an extremely good looking film as well. It's got it's got the style to go with it. I think
there's points where it kind of switches from cinematography to kind of storyboard art.
Yeah,
where there's kind of events that are too massive, too traumatic to be expressed through cinema. So it just switched to this kind of storyboarding art. And I found those very striking.
Yeah, I think it does that really well in terms of the tone and keeping the tone to the ability for us to keep going and the whole point of it, just moving on. And I completely agree. Generally, I'm like animations or things like that take me away, but I thought this worked really, really well. For that exact point that you mentioned, Simon, I think it worked because some of these would be way too big for this budget or this film or a film in general to showcase. No,
I was just gonna say I found this one really impressive as well, and I think that it was a lot of times it was actually really oddly charming. Like the one scene that really sticks in my mind is the bit where he's dancing awfully, and then he spots women dancing equally as bad, and they kind of make eyes. Then it goes into the future, and she's pregnant. And I just thought that was just so oddly charming. I was like, I really like the way that it's balancing like these simple interactions, leading to like that cause and effect of something much bigger at play happening in the future. I like the way that it showcased life like that. I thought that was really nice.
Yeah, I think what Steph's spoken about there is actually a particular example of how I think this is a wonderfully edited film. It would be very easy for and of course, like the reactions will differ slightly, and I think as we've discussed, like Simon didn't quite click with the storytelling in the same way that I feel like I did. But I think it's a wonderfully edited film. I think it would be very, very easy for the editing of this film to make the pacing really pretty weird, to be honest, especially when you're dealing with the shorter runtime. And we've already spoken about one film in the show, in Women in the Window, where the editing maybe leaves a lot to be desired. It's important, I think, maybe sometimes overlooked part of filmmaking, but I think for this film in particular, it's actually extremely well done. I think that sense of cause and effect and the linking of one event to another and what impact it then has on Sebastian's life is really, really put together very well. And I think that it comes in two different ways. I think the editing from one vignette and one kind of scene to another, I think works extremely well in terms of getting across time jumps and what effect it's had and why he finds himself at this point in his life. I think the editing within scenes works well also, but I think that kind of going between scenes, it would be very easy for this film to end up feeling very disconnected, and for me anyway, it didn't feel that. I thought it flowed extremely well and very effectively.
I'm really intrigued by Steph's comparison with Roy Anderson, and I think I would like to revisit it with that in mind, because I think that's a really interesting way of viewing the film.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that, you know, the editing that you mentioned, I think it does work really well, and I do think sometimes, you know, we're passionate here about short films, but it showcases how you can make a shorter film. This isn't a short film, but it's a shorter film, and it worked really well. And perhaps Martin Scorsese and some others, you know, could learn a little bit about editing down.
Did red rag to the bull here, and I'm not having any of this. Right? Is this about the Irishman? Because if it is, we are spoiled for the fight here.
It is about all of them in the last like 15 years. I just think that there's after a certain and also just Netflix in general. After a certain time, we need to, you know, we can edit ourselves down and also be coherent. And I think this film shows that.
No, I'll fight you on the Irishman. I'll give it, if we're talking Netflix things, I'll give you the Kaufman film.
I'm thinking of ending things.
That's it. Yeah.
Well, I think we mostly agree. The Dog Who Wouldn't Be Quiet is quite good. It is going to be available in the UK on Curzon. And when is that?
May 21st.
May 21st. And so look out for that film.